Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Full Subjects podcast. You're not getting the disclaimer from me today. I'm going to throw it over to Austin here in a second. But before we do that, the topic of today's conversation is the condo boom is breaking. Are rentals taking over? So we're going to talk about not necessarily where's the rental market going, but are we going to start seeing a lot more purpose-built rentals or a lot more condos that are rentals in the future? And what does that mean for the housing market? So the big question here, Austin, is Canada moving away from the investor finance condo model toward a housing system increasingly built, financed, and owned as rental housing? So just as I said, are we going to see the rental market grow in the sense that we're going to have a lot more purpose-built rentals and a lot more people are just going to be lifelong renters? I don't know. We'll see.
Well, first, I'll do the disclaimer that this podcast is made for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal, investment, financial, tax, or any other advice. It's not intended to cause or induce breach of any existing agency agreement. And then I will say, absolutely, yes. We are seeing Canada kind of moving away from the investor finance condo model. And the biggest thing that we're seeing is with some of the buildings that are being built, like condo buildings that are being developed, because of prices not being where they need to be in order to turn a profit on a lot of them. A lot of the builders are converting them over to rental buildings because of different financing requirements. You'll probably be able to talk a little bit more about that, but also because they're not able to sell them. And if they're already being built or if they need to build them to stay busy and do things, what else are you going to do?
Good question. You got to do something with those units, right? They got to get the money back.
Yeah. So obviously something has changed. In Toronto, condo starts fell to levels not seen since the 1990s, driven in large part by collapsing pre-sales. We've been talking about that for a while. Not to generalize the market, but across Canada, there are some places that are actually doing pretty well market-wise.
For sure.
Specifically, the lower mainland and Toronto, so like BC and Ontario, are kind of not doing as well. And by kind of not doing as well, they're really not doing well in comparison to some of the other markets that we're actually seeing do pretty well. And with that said, CMHC now reports that rental starts have exceeded condo apartment starts in the city of Toronto. So again, to say that bluntly, you're seeing more rental starts than apartment starts in the city of Toronto.
Which means they're starting to build more rental units and they're building condo units for sale.
Yes, correct.
That's what Austin's saying. Just to be very clear about what he's saying here, that is what he's saying.
And that is crazy. That's
crazy to think about. Yeah.
You know, in Vancouver, there's roughly 2,300 purpose-built rental homes in 2025, the city's highest annual rental completion total in more than 40 years. So again, we're also seeing that a bit in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. Are we watching a temporary response to a bad condo market or the end of the business model that built Toronto and Vancouver for the last 20 years? That's my question to you.
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, right? So just to reiterate what Austin said, are we watching a temporary response to a bad condo market? So we know for a fact that inventory levels are high. There was a lot of condos being built and now all of a sudden no one wants to buy them, or they had pre-sale purchased them and now they're coming up and being like, well, it's worth a lot less than I paid for it. So I'm not really in the best position to buy this anymore. And because of that, we're seeing trouble with that. Or is this the end of the business model that has been Toronto and Vancouver for the last 20 years where condos are being built, people were buying pre-sales, people were flipping pre-sales, like there was people making a good amount of money on some of those opportunities, and that opportunity really isn't there anymore, Austin. So that's just to break down what Austin's asking. Is it the end? I from the pre-sale perspective of seeing those like pre-sales get flipped and people lining up for a day, like there's people camping out to buy pre-sales. And most of those people, let's be honest, weren't planning to live in them. They were buying them as investors and they were speculating on them because they either planned to sell them after completion or just assign the contract. I don't see that happening again. Like I don't see us getting to that craziness that is the pre-sale assignment flipping market. But is it a total end to the condo market in the sense that we're only going to see purpose-built rentals? I have a hard time believing that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously the pendulum will always swing. And as much as we've seen rent prices drop and legislation changes that, like we've talked about in a lot of cases, a lot of people feel that they swing towards protecting the tenant as opposed to the landlord. I think eventually the pendulum will swing the other way where, you know, depending on what you can get a rental unit for as an investment and what rent is on that property. I think it will get to the point where it does make sense for a lot of, or not a lot of people, but some people to kind of dip their toe back into the real estate game, if we want to call it. I think the sentiment, I think people are pretty scared right now to kind of dabble in real estate with what we've seen the market do in the last couple of years, specifically longer, the last 5 years. But I think eventually, if we were to see rent prices slowly increasing and house prices slowly increasing again, I think that we would see people picking up a rental condo unit or a townhouse or etc. Like it will get to the point where it does make sense again, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. So we're going to talk about the topic of this, I guess, is this next section is the machine that built condos broke. So how did the old system work? I'm gonna read it out how I understand it, and I'm gonna throw this over to Austin because he better understands this than me. But developer launches a project, investors buy pre-sales. We all know that pre-sales unlock financing. So the developer now has a certain amount of money because you have to pay deposit when you purchase a pre-sale. And then of course you bought a pre-sale. That building's got to get built, and then the investors either sell or become landlords. Like I said, maybe they sell the unit. Maybe there's the ability to assign the unit before it completes. Or they ultimately become landlords, or they live in those units themselves. So is that more or less how it works, Austin, or how it did work?
Yeah, people, especially with house prices, the way that they were climbing over the last, I would say longer, like 8 or 10 years. But yeah, anyway, a lot of people would speculate on a unit. They'd buy a contract for a unit. And then closer to completion, they would probably be up money and they would basically sell that contract and get their deposit back plus additional money for signing the contract of whatever that home grew to. And was people's investment strategy in some way to make some extra money if they did have those funds available, because we saw prices slowly increasing steady and steady. Unfortunately, what's happened in the last, let's say 3 or 4 years, when we've seen prices drop and adjust, people couldn't get, by the time that unit was ready to complete, it was actually worth less than what they paid for it, which is a problem. And I know that you've obviously dealt with some people on the financing side in those situations, but yeah, that's what we saw basically.
Yeah. Unfortunately, speculation ended up leading to some massive financial detriment for some people. And there's going to be a number of legal battles that come out of these situations because developers are going to want to get paid one way or another. And at the end of the day, the consumer has signed a contract. So I'm not going to get too much into that, but there's more to come on some of the fallout from those situations. Cause I think we're really just not at the start, but we're still we haven't really hit the crest or the climax of that situation yet. I think there's still a lot more to come when it comes to the aftermath. So I'm going to throw some numbers at you here. We're looking at a different area than we're in here, but just to give some context. So as you know, the weak link is now pre-sales. I mean, we've already discussed that. I think that's pretty obvious. This is a crazy stat to me when you think about this region. So in the first quarter of 2026, under 250 new condos sold across the GTHA. So just for clarity here, GTHA is the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. For anybody that's not familiar with that part of Ontario, along Lake Ontario from Toronto to Hamilton is a pretty dense stretch of the population of Canada. A lot of people live there, and there's also a lot of condos along that area as well. Only 250 new condos sold in basically over 3 months. That's a pretty low number. And now here's where it gets crazy. That's down 94% from the 10-year average in the first quarter. 94%. Like, that's insane when you think about that. I don't even know what else to say, but beyond that, completed and unsold inventory reached a record almost 4,300 units in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. So over 4,000 units just in that area unsold and are waiting to be bought because they're completed, they're ready. Insane, Austin. Like, I think it speaks to the fact that we're in such a unique situation right now. And I think some people might have said, hey, look, the writing was on the wall here. Like, this was bound to happen. Mm-hmm. The bubble popped, if you will. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think when I look at this from 30,000 feet or take a step back, there's a ton of pre-sale or leftover pre-sale inventory that's available. And that's for unsold units. In some cases, that's for people that also can't complete where that unit needs to be resold again. That's a slightly different situation. Don't want to talk about like the legal implications of that with deposits retained and reselling and all that stuff. But anyway, there's inventory available. We've done many podcasts about live listings, like total listings inventory being high. And a lot of times that doesn't even take into account the unsold, not on MLS, like pre-sale or assignment stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Because the market's also not great and we've seen it regress, what we're also seeing downstream from that is a lot of the developers don't want to start new projects because they already have a ton of inventory that's sitting that hasn't sold. So what's interesting is like you can't make more 3-year-olds. Either kids are born or they're not, right? And then 3 years from now. So a kind of unique angle to all of this is, okay, so those housing starts that have not happened right now, what are the implications of that going to be into 3, 4, 5 years from now?
Exactly.
Assuming that this, like we talk specifically in Toronto, and the Toronto Hamilton area, as well as the Fraser Valley and Greater Vancouver area, like the Lower Mainland.
Yeah,
it's known across Canada as for inflated, or I shouldn't say inflated, higher than normal real estate prices. I think if prices continue to drop, it will make sense where people can attain getting out and buying their first place. And like if prices continue to drop, eventually it'll get to a point where people say, yeah, okay, for that price, I'll buy it. For that price, I'll get into the market. For that price, I'll make a move, whatever. What happens when that supply and demand shifts the other way and we don't have inventory 3, 4, 5 years from now? What happens to the market?
That's the $1 million question, Austin. And I think I don't know if I would challenge you, but I would push things even further and say, even if prices stay similar for a long enough time that people are willing to accept that, hey, this is where prices are going to stay. They're not going to go lower than this. They might come up from this, but like they're content with, hey, we're kind of at the bottom of the trough now. And like you just said, and people want to now enter the market. We know from looking back that there's not enough homes being built, even when they were building homes for purchase, that we would meet the demand that we're going to see eventually. Now, there's other factors at play here. Immigration has significantly slowed down. Is it going to always be at the level that it is right now? Probably not. We're probably going to increase immigration in the future, and that plays into the demand in the housing market as well. But what are the repercussions of this? I think that's what you're asking. And it's hard to imagine there won't be repercussions in the future if people want to buy and if sentiment changes enough where we start to see that uptick of people trying to get into the market.
Well, and this is funny because you're talking about prices and I'm about to talk about rates, but it's almost in a similar vein to when people were saying, well, we're going to wait for rates to drop to make a move. And then we've seen rates be pretty stable, I'd say, for the last year or two at least, pretty comparable. So we've seen prices drop, we've seen rates kind of stay the same to what people, I'd say, for the most part, anticipate what rates could or should be. So when are those people also going to get off the sidelines? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But here's the reality, Austin, and we're gonna take this to the next step here is developers are going to invest, or they're going to put their money into the things that they're either incentivized to or that are going to make the money, right? So they're building all these condos and they're building all these units for sale because that's what people wanted. That's what people wanted to buy. People were willing to pay the high price that they were being offered at the time because they were speculating that it would grow in value or it would be at least worth what they paid for it in the future. But here's the reality. Developers want to build rentals now because that's where the incentives are, and that's where they have opportunity to make money, right? So,
well, and that's also where the financing's available, right?
Well, that too, and that's what's really interesting is so we've talked about this before. Is the government makes certain changes or offers certain incentives, and on paper they might look okay, but the reality is those incentives often are going to benefit somebody like a developer where they can take advantage of them and they can see the benefits of those incentives, right? And whether or not you believe if that's a good incentive or not, you're going to go where the money is. That's what I'm trying to say. And the fact is they're going to ultimately utilize those incentives while they're available because they won't always be available. And then things will shift and maybe we'll see incentives in other areas. But really all I'm trying to say is that it makes sense that they're building more rentals because that's where it makes sense to put the money right now, right? So yeah, it's interesting, but it's very curious to see what's going to happen in the future, or yeah, it's very curious to see what's going to happen in the future. But any more on what I just touched on, or you want to kind of jump ahead here?
No, I would just add in, obviously there's so the way that these projects typically work, to talk about like from the developer ground up, typically with pre-sales, they need to sell a certain percentage in order to basically start the project and hit financing. Right. And that's typically how these things go. And, I guess this also kind of dives into some of the challenges with some of the developers right now. Is a lot of times what the developers would do is they would, just sell the minimum amount of units, or maybe they'd hold some back. And the reason for that is if they were selling all these condo units hypothetically for, let's say, 500K, and you're seeing the market steadily increase, and by the time they actually go to complete, just like the investors that are speculating on them, if those same units that they've priced out are now worth 550 or 600K, the developer also has an incentive to hold on to some of those units, because they're going to be making more money if they just sell them later and they've hit their threshold to get financing. What we've seen, obviously, is maybe some of these developers are holding on to some of these units, and then, the final, move-in time comes around and they're down 50 or 100 grand. Like the opposite has happened, and people are not able to complete, walking on their deposits or losing their deposits, whatever you want to call it. Not good. And then obviously talking about now the shift to the rentals, there's government incentives, financing programs, development charge relief, federal removal of GST from qualifying new rental construction. Like there's a ton of incentives that the government has come out with for these developers to now do the purpose-built rentals. And that's why they're shifting all of their focus to that. So I just wanted to round that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Absolutely. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is as somebody that wants to be a renter, not me specifically, but if you're somebody that wants to be a renter, is this good news? Like they're building more rentals, which means there's more rental inventory. In theory, that should help bring the price of rentals down because you have more choices, just like it does with the housing market, the buy and sell market. Problem is a lot of these new rentals aren't going to be at a low price point. These are brand new buildings. These are premium rentals, if you will, Austin, right? They're not 10, 20-year-old condos that a single landlord owns. And they cost a certain amount to build. Like in Vancouver, Toronto, they're not cheap to build a condo building and make them money. There's still costs to do that. So they have to recover those costs to a certain level of rent. So it may or may not be a better option for renters. Like, yeah, you can get a better product at a higher price point, but still might not be the most affordable option. Obviously, there's a different category of affordable rentals, and there's incentives for developers to build those as well, where they get rebates, et cetera, from the government. But in general, purpose-built rentals for the purpose of generating income are going to be expensive on the onset because the developer just had to fork out a bunch of money to build these rentals, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So that's another consideration. So here's my next question. Have we solved the housing shortage in the sense that we're going to create more options for housing? They're going to be rentals, or are we just changing who's going to own the expensive housing? Because is it just going to mean that if less people can afford to own houses because there's less houses to own and everything else is a rental?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It reminds me of like with the argument of, who's changed the expensive or who's changed owning the expensive housing. It almost reminds me of when the Airbnb ban came out, and, us being in real estate, we got a bad rep for being like, oh, we don't like this. We were saying that it gives the hotels a monopoly and, all this kind of stuff, but it was kind of true. We saw some of those prices rising for vacation destination areas. And we obviously talked as well about how, staying at an Airbnb or something specific for that is a much different experience than living in a hotel or some of these other short-term accommodations. Yeah. But yeah, in theory, you're just, you're taking the secondary, typically appreciating asset that might be a condo that somebody lives in, that the rent also pays off the mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. You're just changing who owns that, I guess. I think so. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think that they were just creating a bigger problem later, but at the same time, I get it. Like, I get why it's happening. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have much more to add than that. I just think that we're going to see the repercussions of this. And I wonder, is it possible for these purpose-built rentals to become owner-occupied units? Like, is that an opportunity? And this is me asking.
To convert it down the road?
Yeah, this is me asking naively, like, is that possible? And how hard is that to do? Like if you have a 500 unit building, do you have to does the developer have to say, hey, we're going to sell all 500 units. Sorry, your contract ends whenever. Like, is that even possible? And that's me asking naively because I don't know the answer to it, but I'm curious, like how easy is that to do? Like I would imagine there would be repercussions to that, because if you're getting incentives to offer rental units and you're now all of a sudden like, nah, I'm going to cash out and sell these units.
Well, that was also, and again, I haven't seen any news come out about this, so I want to be mindful of how I say this, but that was a lot of the critique of the quote unquote condo bailout as well.
Right.
Where it's like, okay, so who's buying these? For what price? What are they going to be purposed for? Like, it's well, I guess it is slightly different, but yeah, you're asking great questions. And let me just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people are asking these questions, and a lot of people are trying to get ahead of this and follow the numbers and follow the stats, right? Because the stats indicate that we're building more purpose-built rental condos, and we're building less owner-occupied condos, which makes sense. There's a high inventory of those right now, but where does this lead us to in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And will we see the pendulum swing completely the other way? Like it feels like that's where we're going, and we're just 3 to 5 years from now, Austin, we might be having a very interesting conversation about this, is all I can say.
Yeah, totally. And just for the record as well, I think it's important to say this bluntly, just so that we're being honest and candid. Like if you're talking about like a monthly expense, I think it would be fair to say for a lot of people, it actually makes more sense to rent right now than own, because
100%.
your rent is probably going to be cheaper compared to what your mortgage would be on that same property. When you look at things like property taxes that are expected and everything else, and even things like, appliance maintenance and everything else. Like for a lot of people, renting makes a ton of sense right now. Ton of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make sure we're not coming across as like, renting is a bad thing. Like for a lot of people, it makes a lot of sense. And I think right now from just like a dollars and cents, or if you're just looking at like expenses as opposed to paying off mortgage and how much would be going towards principal, blah, blah, blah. Like for a lot of people, just from a cash flow perspective, it probably makes a fair amount of sense. But again, like we talked about, when does the pendulum shift the other way where, you're going to be happy that you were maybe paying a little bit extra money out of pocket on your mortgage, but that equity starts to build up and your debt gets bought down, et cetera, et cetera. Let's shift into the future and looking forward, because like we've talked about, this is kind of the problem that nobody sees until 2028, the whole, you can't make more 3-year-olds argument.
Yeah.
Today's condos, they were financed and launched years ago. What's going on in the markets, therefore, like right now, affects future completions, not just today's market. So, with CMHC explicitly warning about the split of short-term supply being elevated, declining starts, creating the possibility of tighter conditions longer term. Like you could have two different things happening at the same time. No?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think you can. I do think you can. Do you not think that? Is that what you're asking me?
Well, I just think like 2026 right now, we have lots of inventory, rental completions, weak condos. And then in 2028, we're going to have far fewer ownership units arriving because today's projects were never launched, right?
Well, exactly. Or they were launched and shifted into rentals, and now we've got a surplus. I think, are we going to just see a huge surplus of rentals that nobody wants to rent, and then people wanting to buy and nobody being able to buy anything? And that's why I asked the question, is there a future where they try to shift those rentals to owner occupied? Are those units even the right type of unit that people want to buy? I imagine they're similar units in the sense that it's a condo. You know what I mean? It's whether it's a rental or it's a purchase, they're set up similarly. So it's not like it's a major difference in that respect. But yeah, it feels like we're going to see that problem in a few years here. And there's going to have to be something that gives, or prices are going to not necessarily inflate again, but increase again, because inventory is going to be low. And we've seen how quickly the market can shift over a few years in terms of price, both up and down. And these are the types of things that we believe, or maybe I'm speaking for myself here, but that I believe can shift a market. It's just not going to happen right now. It's going to take some time to happen.
Very, very well said. Let's, we're just coming up on 30 minutes. We will wrap this up.
Yeah.
If you're a renter and you're looking at a $600,000 or $800,000 condo turning into a purpose-built rental, like at completion, that could make renting a little bit financially attractive today. But if ownership construction falls dramatically for several years, buyers waiting for the perfect market, they may eventually encounter a different problem, less new inventory. So I genuinely, as much as we're doing an episode about this, I am personally very intrigued by what the next couple of years in real estate looks like and what's going to happen, because I remember, do you remember the conversation we had with Braden Reimer when he was talking about like all of the changes that the government has made to like, the way he described it is like you're over medicating the tenancy and market basically by, making all these changes. And I think, or was tenancy or the housing market with like different shifts. Like sometimes you just gotta give it time,
sit back, see what happens.
See what happens, to see what the consequences of what we do are. And obviously that's driven by some external things right now. But it's going to be very interesting to see how the next couple of years goes because of what we're seeing or not seeing right now.
Yeah, well said. I'm going to leave you guys with this. Canada may finally be building rental housing at scale. The question is whether we're fixing the housing market or setting up the next shortage while solving the last one.
Very well said. Thanks for joining us for another episode, guys. Make sure to subscribe if you're not subscribed. That way you get notified as soon as we drop an episode. And of course, leave us a 5-star review. We do appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.